Hey folks, Evil DM here. I got another episode of Batman the Role-Playing Game DC Heroes 3rd Edition. This time I'm going to be talking a little bit about a question I got from one of my viewers. He wanted to know a little bit about movement in combat because I've been playing on my Twitch channel, / the Evil DM. I'll put a link below. Batman the Role-Playing Game with my gaming group. We were using a virtual tabletop and he was curious what I was using for movement. So, before I get into that, I just want to say that I really don't care much for the exact details of combat as far as movement. I usually use theater of the mind, but since we're playing on a virtual environment right now, as far as online and everything, it's harder to express things when you don't exactly have a camera for everybody. So, we have to use a virtual tabletop, and people like to know their movement on a virtual tabletop. So, with that said, just wanted to give you this little page on page 95, this little note right here that says, a key rule to remember when plotting characters' position is to keep things moving. Do not spend a lot of time drawing out elaborate maps and diagrams once play begins. Rough sketches drawn in a minute or less will suffice. In fact, everyone in the gaming group has a lot of experience with the game. It is often unnecessary to keep written track of the combatants' positions at all. When the character is playing, they really don't want you to worry about this at all. It's just, they're basically telling you, meh, wave your hand. It's just, who cares? Don't worry about the little details. Don't sweat it. Things like that. And experienced players don't even need that anymore. And I'm at the point with most of the games that I play that I don't really mind. If it makes sense, just do it. Whatever's fun for you and your group. Now, if the exact number of movement for you and your group is what is your fun zone, then, well, this is the video for you. So, according to the book, we can find that on page 91 or 92, we talk about how far a person can move at any given time during combat. So, you can move as long as you do not have a movement power 4 APs of movement, and your movement is based on your dexterity. So, should you have anything lower than that 4, that's what you are moving at. Anything over is lost because you don't have a movement power. We'll get to the movement power in just a second, but for right now, let's just talk about people without movement powers. How do I handle this? Now, 4 APs in DC Heroes is actually equal to 150 feet, according to the chart. Okay, so now that we have that down, we have 150 feet is what you can cover in your movement as a normal person without movement powers. Now, in modern battle mats and maps that people design, they design it as 5-foot squares. That is generally what they design maps for, sometimes 10 foot. It really depends on the artist. But generally it's designed for 5 foot or D20 or D&D modern combat. D20, Pathfinder, whatever, Starfinder. Generally, it's, 5 foot a square. So how do you change this on your virtual tabletops or your table if you're using it at your home or something? My suggestions are a couple things here. You could say the heck with it and start using rulers and everything and do your 150 feet. It seems a little far for someone to travel in 4 seconds of time or something there, but whatever. Or what you can do is translate it into modern battle map time. So what you do is you take your 150 feet, divide it by the 5-foot squares, gives you 30 feet of movement. 6 squares. That's how much your character with a 4 AP can move, is 6 squares per their turn. That's the max. If they have 4. Now, should they have 3, they would move 5 squares. Should they have 2, they move 4 squares. Should they have 1, 3 squares. Now, that doesn't exactly add up versus the others exactly on the chart, but it's a fair comparison that I've used in the past, and most people are quite happy with it, and they're not too upset. And they understand if somebody has more APs, yeah, they move faster or they move just a little bit quicker during that 4-second time period. So, I mean, you could sit there and do the maths for how many squares someone with 3 APs or 2 APs and 1 APs. And if that's what you like to do, absolutely do that. I don't want to do that because I don't like having to deal with extra work when rolling. I mean, there's so much stuff you have to do as a GM that worrying about this little minute detail, I'm not worried about it. I've come up with this system and it works just fine. You can see in the Batman the role-playing game, we're just using the 6 squares. I gave everybody a fair 6 squares, so that's how they work. Now, moving on to movement powers. Now, I've toyed around with 2 different ways how to get this to work, and I just found that the easiest one is the second method I'm about to tell you. But I'll tell you the first method, that's the convoluted method. So, for movement powers, you ask the player how many squares over 6 they wish to cover. So let's say the player decides on 10 squares as opposed to normal 6. That's 4 squares over. Got it. Now take his movement power, for example, and say he has a super speed of 8. Subtract the 4 standard APs that you can move minus the super speed of 8, and that gives you 4. Where I came up with this, I don't know. It just came up to me one day. Give me a 4. So his acting value on the chart is now a 4 versus his opposing value of 4 because he wanted to move 4 squares over the 6. So the player needs an 11 or higher roll to even get anything done. Now, this method doesn't always work out all that well, and I believe if we look at the chart here, so we're looking at a 4 versus 4, which is an 11, but he needs to actually roll higher than the 11 because if you look at the next page, a 4 versus 4, he'd only move 1 extra square if he just nails it. So basically, he's just moving 7 squares. But should he get over that and get column shifts, he can go 2, or he can go all the squares he wanted, plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, and keep moving on. So basically, you're letting the dice do the work for you. Is it extra dice rolling? Yeah. Is it fun? Some people like it. Some people don't like it. If they fail, you just say no. You move your standard 6 squares. You're not able to move that fast during the time. It basically just lets the dice do the work for you. Or the easy method is the power equals the number of squares you can move. So if you have an 8, then boom, you move 8 squares. Simple as that. That's how I handle movement in my combats. Is it DC Heroes exactly? No. Does it work with modern maps? Absolutely. Are players happy for the most part? Yeah, they're not really going to be that disappointed. I mean, if you had a 15 in your super speed and you were bouncing into combat with 15 squares, I think you'd be quite happy. But if your super speed is 2, you aren't going to be using your super speed of 2 when you have a dexterity of 4. You'll be using your regular movement. So it kind of plays off like that. Let me know what you do for your combat. I know this was just an example of what I do. This is obviously not an official capacity. Anybody who thinks it is should definitely not think that and only refer to the people that created the game as the official capacity. So tell me what you think and keep it original, keep it old school, and good night, everybody.